Welcome to the Make School Great Again podcast, where we challenge the status quo in education and cast a bold kingdom vision for the next generation. I'm Kale, and I'm here with my co-host James, and today we're looking at the following topic. Education should form thinkers, not followers. Kingdom-centered learning cultivates critical discernment, spiritual resilience, and identity in Christ. So that is the lens in which we're looking at education today from that Christian perspective. And as always, let's jump into some stats that will set the tone as for why we're talking about this. 82% Gen Z. It's our favorite generation, isn't it? They report struggling with anxiety about identity, purpose, and belonging. That's from Barna. And 70% of Christian teens say that they feel pressure to compromise values in public school settings. Not a real surprise there in that setting, but very interesting times we're living in. It's funny, thinking about this, I listened to several pastors that talk on this, and one of which is a fellow out of California called Joe Schimmel. And I don't know if you might have heard him from his documentary series he did a long while back on They Sold Their Souls to Rock and Roll. And it was like a music doco on just the influence of music. But he makes this idea that, Satan actually doesn't wait until adulthood to start targeting the minds of children. And the battle for worldview begins really early. And we've spoken about that in previous episodes. And I think that's certainly what we see, particularly in education. But, these kind of warnings that we're talking about aren't meant to be just alarmist. They're biblical. I think that we are actually facing a generation that is increasingly shaped by confusion. And so we have to be asking that question, what kind of thinkers are we raising? And so this leads us to our first big question, which is, what does it mean to be a kingdom thinker in today's world? Because we would both agree that education just isn't about filling minds and heads. It's about forming hearts and shaping desires, which then shape behaviors. So from your experience, James, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What does it mean to be a kingdom thinker? I mean, you've been around Christian education for quite a while. You've seen it from the educator's perspective and how you've done study in how their worldview shapes teaching and learning. And obviously you've been around enough kids to know how they're being raised to view the world. Yeah, comments on this idea of being a kingdom thinker in today's world.
Yeah, I think it sort of, we go, all right, what is kingdom? Are we just talking about heaven here? Are we talking about heaven on earth? Are we talking about like this whole definition around what is that kingdom and therefore that kingdom thinker? And it's very much, I guess, when I'm thinking about it, it's heart, mind, spirit, right? It's all of it together, and it's all of this sort of not separating these things, but how do we align these that we're not only having good thinkers, we're not having sort of kids or students that are thinking about the kingdom or knowing about the Bible or knowing about a worldview that is aligned biblically, but it's really having that sort of foundation that we're educating the whole person around being a kingdom thinker, which is heart, mind, and spirit. So establishing a foundation, then knowing this as the definition of a kingdom thinker, then everything is encompassing in this thing, right? And so we're looking at our learning, we're looking at our music, we're looking at spiritual and prayer life and Bible and interaction and well-being. Like all of this comes together, and it's founded in that biblical worldview. Like, how do we view the world? How do we view us as people? And then how do we as educators view our students? Well, they're a whole person. And so that's how we, I guess, set everything up from that perspective. If we're doing kingdom thinking, or we're setting our thinkers up as kingdom thinkers.
Yes. No, I love how you put that. It's actually, part of it is starting with how we view the learner. Because I think a lot of the time in the general education system, it's, students are seen as just being, soul and body. It's that secular idea, psychology, where you just view it as mind and body, and that's it. Whereas, no, it's tripartite. It's three parts. So when we learn to educate students through that lens, that there's actually three parts that we're fostering and nurturing, that changes everything.
Yeah.
And as really, really important, I think, if you are a Christian educator, that's how you view, or that's what's shaping the way you approach any kind of learning situation or environment. I just want to circle to this idea of worldview, because we talk about this a lot. And I think maybe there's some confusion around what does this mean to have a biblical worldview? Because I think a lot of schools and, even Christian educators, parents would say, yeah, I have a biblical worldview. And maybe our definitions of what that is varies, right? Until you actually, dig a little bit deeper and flesh it out, it can vary. But I just wanted to look at the history of this term worldview. There were voices like Francis Schaeffer, who I've been learning about over the past few years, Charles Colson, Nancy Pearcey, David Norgal, James Sire, David Noble. They are those voices that have really brought it into the Christian mainstream, but it's not something that, they came up with necessarily. It's centuries old in its usage, but they've brought it into the heart of Christian discipleship. And I want to have a look at particularly Francis Schaeffer. He was referenced in a book one of my favorite books, I've mentioned it before, Beyond Biblical Integration. And in the book, the author references Francis Schaeffer's analogy of two rooms. And basically, Schaeffer is of the belief that we sometimes divorce fact from meaning. And so he basically makes this case that we need to reject the secular sacred split and embrace a whole life discipleship where faith informs every field of knowledge. And so he was born in 1912, died in 1984, who's a pastor, theologian, philosopher in Switzerland. And here's how this two rooms analogy, I think, is really important for us as Christians and those particularly in the educational space and outside of it. I'm going to talk in any sphere, how to understand this idea of two rooms, where he basically says that Western culture became divided into two rooms, where the first one is the upper room, which represents faith, values, meaning, spirituality, and purpose. And these are often seen as like those private, subjective, personal truths that we kind of just keep to ourselves, that we can believe, but it's only in our personal life. And then the lower room represents science, facts, reason, empirical knowledge. And these are often seen as those objective public truths, what society trusts to make decisions about law and education and so forth. And so his warning was that we've split truth in half. We're kind of, the lower room is what is real and binding, whereas the upper room is seen as personal opinion and not relevant to public life. Yeah. And so that's led to this idea of this sort of divided lives in that, we go to church on Sunday and that's something we do then, but then it doesn't really impact what we do in school, the workplace, or in the public square. And so his call to Christians is to reunite truth and reclaim more of that holistic Christian worldview that applies to every area in life. And I'll ask for your take on this. I remember when I was in school, I struggled with that idea that I had to keep that biblical worldview and my faith sort of separate. Yeah. Or maybe I just kind of referred to it at times, but then the bottom room was where life happened. And when I understood this analogy, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. That was maybe that frustration I was feeling in the system that emphasized that lower room a lot. And you kind of just keep your own personal opinions and faith up in that top room. I don't know, is that something you saw?
Yeah, I think like that even goes back to the why behind worldview is really important, and why we need to see our learners as three parts in mind, body, and spirit. And we're educating or focusing in on the mind and the body, and then because we are spiritual beings as well, that's being left separate and being searched for on their own. And so if we're not having this holistic view on bringing the upper and the lower together as such, I think that's where all these gaps are coming from. And there's this search for meaning and this identity that's sort of going on, which we see in not just students or learners, but even like in adults, right? And we some of our own peers or people that we're connected to, it's because there hasn't been this holistic approach to how we learn and how we see the world and how we interact with the world and how we interact with others. It means that search for making sense of the upper room has been neglected. And I fear that that's what, when we've separated that and we don't have a true direction or a true line around, okay, well, this is faith and this is how this works with our decision making and how we interact with others and what is truth and what is right. And so the gap is that this is where this dysfunction happens in the world. And then I guess also where we see from our students' perspective, when we're not fostering that whole person, we are allowing them to make mistakes and have uncertainty around, okay, what is faith? What are the right values? Do I get to choose these for myself? Doing that, it's personal, it's private, and we've got this whole other issue of lack of truth. And so for me, I think where I've seen this in particular is from a school perspective, to go, right, well, we'll separate even in Christian schools or most likely in Christian schools, because we'll have a Christian studies or Bible studies class, and we'll have chapel, and we'll have part of our mission statement. We are, light of the world, or some sort of Bible verse that makes it a Christian school. But everything else in school life is the lower room. It's the subjects, it's the curriculum, even some of the well-being components. It's like psychology. It doesn't even bring in the spiritual component of the school or the person to be able to do mediation or to do, reconciliation or whatever it might be between students, or discipline. And it's left again in the lower. This is the way in which we do that. And so I think even Christian schools have fallen into this gap, this error or this mistake of all right, we've got the upper room elements that we'll leave separate, and we're not going to have it as part of, or be it intentional or not, it's not part of the other facets of school life.
Yeah, because we need to tick the boxes for curriculum, need to show that we're teaching a certain even perspective or just topically. So we'll get this done, and then we'll focus about the Sunday stuff on Friday chapel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's so important that, I think when people think of sort of this Christian education idea, maybe many people think that it's just Christian kids being able to quote Bible verses. Whilst that's important, that's great if you can. If they're still thinking like the world, then that's a problem. And so I think when you are taking into account this idea that we don't want to have this separation of upper and lower room, and we actually want them to holistically understand the world, that's how you're going to create kingdom thinkers who engage in culture with clarity and conviction. And they're not going to be fence sitters. They're not going to be those that sit on the fence and say, well, I don't really want to offend or do anything that might hurt these people here. They're actually bold and courageous in their faith, what they understand about the world. And that is where I think there's been a lot left to be desired with people I talk to that have gone through Christian education. That element, or that maybe that product hasn't been there at the end.
There's a gap. Exactly.
There's a gap.
Exactly. And that's what is then influencing society, right? So we have these either, it could be weak Christians, or maybe it is just simply uninformed or like sort of ill-directed around certainty and around having that true conviction of, as a kingdom thinker, it is everything in one. And it's how I am able to interact with others. It's how I am able to self-reflect and respond to the world and have my resilience. It's how I'm able to run a business, start a business, be able to contribute to society in some way, shape or form. It's how I'm able to come under leadership, or how I'm able to take leadership, but it's also in my knowledge. And so it's this kingdom thinker is having three parts in one. And that's how we are, I guess, interacting with the world. And what, our goal is in setting up our kingdom thinkers with the students that we've got under our care, to then go, all right, how can we make sense of the world through body, mind, and spirit? But then how do we interact with the world?
And I think with that foundation laid, we move from what a kingdom thinker is to what actually shapes their identity. Because we can talk about sort of how we view individuals as being that tripartite nature, which resembles God's nature, three parts. And so, I guess our next question is, well, how does culture shape identity versus how God forms it? And I'll say this, culture tells kids who to be, where God invites them to become who he made them to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important statement that we see kids facing. Culture is having such a heavy influence in telling them what they should be like through, pop culture, media, music, all of the above. That is what's shaping their theology without them actually even realizing it. And so what would you say has been the cultural narratives that are shaping identity today from your perspective?
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Culture is always changing. So what we see today is going to be different to, our generation and then to our parents' generation. There's definitely clear things that has informed that culture, and that culture then very much informs identity and how individuals, make sense of their identity based on the culture. Where it for us, kingdom thinkers, it's a flip on that, right? We find identity in Christ to then be in and amongst culture, which often means that we're quite countercultural because that's how we're called to be. But I guess, when we're looking at the world around us, I'm thinking of my own kids, like they might say things or they might like have, these sort of trends. I'm like, wait, what's that thinking come from? Or where's that coming from? Or what informs that? And, it's a game that they've been on, or, one of the latest movies that they may have watched. And, most of them are harmless, like Pixar, Disney, or whatever it might be. But these things are informing culture. It's, what's the latest trend or the clothing or it's neither here or there, right? It's so passing that in a week's time, it's going to be a new catchphrase. And it's all these things that when I look at my own kids to go, okay, like this is culture, this is helping them shape, or maybe not helping them, but this is like shaping their identity or how they might see the world at this point in time. And I guess we're very intentional and aware of that we're also very intentional about, okay, we've got a biblical lens on how we interact in our family. And so we either will sort of go counter to that or speak into that or say, hey, that's not right because of X, Y, and Z, or it might be just, a trend thing that we're indifferent to. It doesn't matter. But it's very much, there's so much consumption and it's changing so quickly, like days, weeks at a time, that this is where the cultural norms or identity is being shaped. And so no wonder kids, no wonder people, regardless of if they're students or not, are having this struggle with their personal identity because they're allowing whatever the cultural trend or norm at the time to shape that, rather than having a solid, firm foundation in who their identity is and where they should be finding that identity.
And in an age where there's everything's so accessible, like you mentioned Disney and things, and I think that's such an interesting topic because whilst there's probably been some Disney stuff that's been okay, there's certainly Disney stuff I wouldn't let my children watch at all.
Yeah.
And I think in time it's become more obvious of the agendas that are being inserted into certain character roles and values and themes that are shaping young kids. And so I'll often ask people if there's a series of movies, and people that are sort of in the know about this stuff might say, oh, movie 1's okay, 2, 3, and 4, it goes woke. Or they introduce this, and this, and I wouldn't bother. And so I just think that's where we're at as a society, even with kids' movies.
Yeah, exactly. We have to go and watch a kids' movie first before we let our kids watch them. Like, come on. It's like, I don't have time for this.
Yes. Let's talk about this idea of how their identity is shaped. And obviously it's in Christ. That's the foundation that we want our children, our students to grow in an understanding of. Some of those practices, I guess, from an educational point of view, we see it in our programs. It's something that we do through our sequence, but I think it's really important that students are reflecting on the past through God's perspective. So particularly from that historical side of things. And it's not just, there's history, but then there's also the history of their own lives and how they can understand how God can redeem even painful moments for their purpose. So being reflective through God's lens, I think, is really important for that worldview formation. Another part is the idea that, the space that we allow them to ask deep discerning questions. Like, what do I believe? Why do I live this way? Is it something that just my family does and I'm just I have to do it? Or, is it something that I should be making a decision for myself, right? Which is something I think every Christian on their walk hits that point where if you grew up in a Christian environment, there's at some point you have to make that decision for yourself where it's, you're thinking more for yourself and you've got, that responsibility as you get older.
Yeah.
So that's the second point. The third one would be engaging in that discipleship and mentorship environment. And whether that's through the educators that your children are with or people from church or their friends, God uses those, I guess, impactful relationships to help shape their identity. He doesn't want you to do that in isolation.
Yeah. And I think that's both direct and indirectly. Like that could be an intentional, this is a mentoring or discipleship type of relationship, whether it be Bible studies or youth or, one-on-one. It's also through observation. Like I know half of the people that influenced me growing up were just based on, I watched them, I looked up to them. I thought that they were a great dad or a great father or a great husband or so that is an element of mentorship in the sense of who are you surrounding yourselves with that your kids are naturally looking up to and how is that shaping their own identity? And is that a biblical or Christian influence?
Yes, absolutely. Number 4, pursue new faith stretching experiences. Whether that's going on a camp or whether that's just going into a new social environment with like-minded families. I think that's really important too, especially in the homeschool space. That's always a big one where parents are always concerned about this idea of connection and having community. And then also the 5th one is living in rhythms that foster growth. So allowing the space to hear God's voice in what they're learning. I had such good feedback from one of our educators earlier. I spoke on the phone and she just wanted to give me an update because she's on the front lines in terms of getting back their work and assessing it and just especially seeing the progress of some of these kids over the past year. And she was telling me how blown away she was by the responses and the level of depth that they had grown since her time with them from that biblical worldview understanding.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting about what she said was that it's not something that kids join the program and they just they get it, they understand it. This has taken almost a year. He said, and for some kids, they're still getting there. But this idea that worldview formation isn't something you just jump in the stream and you've got it. It's a process and it's a journey for everyone based on their experiences and what they currently believe. But to see them grow and align themselves and actually be thinking, well, what does God have to say about this topic or view on this? She was blown away. So that was, it's really hard to measure biblical worldview formation, but that kind of feedback is helpful in understanding, okay, what it is that we're doing through our programs is allowing the space to hear God's voice amidst the cultural noise that is going on. And so that for me is if that's just one student that's got that, I'll keep working on providing the space and yourself to facilitating that kind of thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole worldview concept and the how we see the world and we talk about the things that have shaped identity and the things that have contributed to that, and they might be things that we carry with us and continue, or the whole idea is that we're able to also reflect in that process and go, okay, these don't need to shape me, and these I can learn new things, and this creates or builds on my worldview or shifts my worldview or changes, and that continuing refinement around what is that true biblical worldview? Who does Christ? What does the Bible say about who my identity is in him? How am I to see the world interact? And I think what you said with those 5 points of really interrogating that, and it's not I don't have it, I'm not finished. And that's a continual thing.
Yeah.
Knowing that the world is constantly changing and we're going to need to respond to it in multiple ways, in different ways, but also to know, okay, how do I continue to refine that? How do I continue to look at my own identity, my own current worldview? And is that aligned to the kingdom? That's that whole kingdom thinking.
Yes, it's active.
Yeah.
It's when it says be conformed or be transformed by the renewing of your mind, it's active. It's not something that, you become a Christian and you've got it.
Yeah. Tick done. No, all right.
I'm renewed. Yeah, and I understand everything. It's even for adults and teachers in this space, myself included, it's an ongoing process. You're always reflecting on how does this connect to God's word? which is
Yeah.
true?
Yeah.
And what are the things I need to reevaluate that might not be aligned with how he views the world or this topic in particular? And so, you can either develop your worldview intentionally or you drift into one that's disorganized and
that's right.
self-contradictory. So
Yeah.
you need to be doing something intentional. So for students, it's the same as adults,
Yeah.
teachers, same
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. And I think that's the gap that we were talking about earlier, or the gap that we see is that schools, even Christian schools, are only doing the mind and body, right? And so it's that, again, that upper room, that lower room. Like, there's so much here that the reason why we've got kids, based on a lot of these stats that we're talking about, seeing it irrelevant, that they're not wanting to go to church. There's no sort of connection between their spiritual life and their personal life. Like, we're seeing all these stats because schools are more in the position of mind and body. And so we're not worrying about shaping worldview. We just want them to know X, Y, Z, or we want them to get through these grades or whatever it might be. And I guess that's at the core of the why behind what we do in our different learning environments, but also what this podcast is about. It's sort of recognizing that to then put it on the map or in a position where we can question it and go, this is why we're seeing so many problems in the world with young people.
Yeah. And because it's not wrong that schools focus on shaping and developing intellect. Like, that's part of it, but it's not the only thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, how are we shaping the desires, the purpose, their imagination? Like, how is that actually then going into behaviors?
Yeah.
In that book I was referring to before, it's like, how do you measure that biblical worldview formation? Well, it's not like there's really a test to do that, but unless you could really spend time with somebody across a month, you're not really going to know. That's obviously not possible in a school situation. But there's this idea that if the education isn't shaping what they think, their desires, and then their behaviors, then something needs to change. Because it's through those behaviors that you're actually seeing whether or not what you're doing is having an impact, even if it takes time.
Yeah.
Like I said, our students, a year, and some we feel, at least from the feedback I got, that they've actually reached the point that, okay, I think it's clicked. They understand what we're trying to do and how we're trying to help them think about the world and the time that we're living in. And so, when that happens, their identity is being made in Christ, and then courage is the natural outflow. We're actually developing thinkers that go out to the world, that have courage and are bold and aren't fence sitters. They know what they believe. They know why.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be impacted when they're hit with all those arrows from a different perspective. Hey, they know how to handle themselves. I think that's really important. So let's explore how kingdom education equips students to stand firm, particularly in today's age, because we would both agree the goal isn't to raise safe kids, it's to raise strong ones. We don't want them protected because we just want to protect them and not have them know what's going on in the world. It's to develop strong ones that can go out understanding all the different perspectives, all the different worldviews.
Yeah.
Because they've wrestled with it, they've navigated it, and they've been able to think for themselves about it as to how this connects to scripture and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Even, when I was head of Christian studies, but our next unit for our 15 to 17-year-olds is exactly that. It's looking at sort of what is these comparative religions around, what are these different worldviews that are in the world, and what do they have to say about some of life's big questions? And why or how are we as Christians different? And with the purpose of allowing students to not be immersed in the sense of, I'm experiencing this faith to work it out for myself, but to go, okay, this is the worldview that these other faiths push to the world. This is their agendas. This is their purpose. This is their why. You're going to come across these people more and more as a multicultural, multi-faith world we are, and especially in Australia and United States or wherever you might be. Then how do we have proper dialogue, but also how do we have our students and ourselves as well. How do we stand firm in what we believe and why? And again, it's not that whole, just stay away from it and don't even have the conversation and stay safe. It's no, we with unapologetically be able to say, this is what we believe and why, and have that firm sort of knowledge, but conviction.
Absolutely. We've spoken about this idea that identity needs to be formed by truth, not trends, right? You talked about trends being something that just come and go. Like one year it's this, the next year it's this. And even with clarity for students, I think they still need to walk in wisdom, right? Because in today's age, we're flooded with half-truths and ideologies that sound good, but they lead astray.
Yep.
And discernment isn't an option. Like, it's essential today.
Yeah.
And one of the real drivers behind my heart in education and the disconnect I saw within the system was there was this separation of what is actually going on in the world from a biblical understanding to what was happening in schools. And if we're meant to lead out and prepare kids for the world, I had an issue that wasn't actually happening. They were going into the world as sort of zombies of products of just information that they've been told to believe. And I want to read a verse from Daniel 12:10. It says this: "Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand." So, there's this emphasis on wisdom in the day and age. And he's the perfect example of somebody who navigated a culture that was foreign to him and had a lot of influence through his wisdom. And so I think in this current hour, not we're going to go into the eschatological topics, but people talk about the last days. I believe we've been in the last days since Jesus ascended. We're in that period back then. But I think specifically now, it's really important that we have an understanding that's not just from that intellect that we spoke about, but it's wisdom that's rooted in righteousness. And so, we want them to be wise who understand what's truly happening in the culture around them, not oblivious or this disconnect about why these things are happening.
I think with that, and that's a kingdom thinking mentality, right? There's a reason for that. It's not just to say, there's this great verse about Daniel in the Bible. I was just had a look as you all talk about that Matthew 24:24. There's going to be these false messiahs or false prophets or this false information, right? It's going to appear to be great. So much so that it's even it deceives, or it's even those who are the elect could even be possibly deceived, right? Those who believe in God. And so if we're not setting up kingdom thinkers, if we're not setting us up to have this real firm, holistic worldview that doesn't separate, this is the spiritual, this is the faith element, and this down here is sort of like how we interact with the world, there's going to be deception. And as you're saying here, the whole idea of being courageous and being firm in that is that then there's the conviction and there's then not the deception that potentially even those who believe in God, right, is going to go through.
Let's talk about the Charlie Vector 019 time.
Okay.
Now, I'm just throwing this out. We didn't talk about this in the pre-show, but let's talk about it. When that all went down, I remember thinking, this isn't the mark of the beast, right? There was certain circles that were like, oh my gosh, this is the mark of the beast. They're, telling people to do this and then they can't buy and sell and all of that. The way I viewed it was, I don't subscribe to that, but I understood that this was a pattern or a foreshadowing of something that will eventually be a reality.
Yeah.
And I was actually shocked at the amount of Christians that were actually not aware or even considered that point of view.
Yeah.
That, whilst it's not the mark of the beast, it's something that's paving the way and setting the stage for it in a way that's global and has never happened before.
Yeah.
And so I was quite shocked that maybe no one was thinking about it or talking about it or was aware of that. And it wasn't until
considering that could be a possibility. Or at least the foreshadowing of a possibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that was, when that happened, I felt like I was prepared from just a worldview point of view that this isn't something that's operating out of something that's good. This is actually something that's being set up and the infrastructure being put in place for something like that to occur. So as Christians, we need to be aware of that and approach it with wisdom. I didn't see that happening.
No. I was also very shocked with the amount of people, Christians, that were like, as many as it needs to be, I'll line up, or yep, nope, stay away, don't even question it. Like whatever we're being told is absolute truth, and then also the whole potential look again what we've been talking about this whole episode. Like, where is the biblical worldview on not just this, on anything that we are confronted with in the world? Like, we do need to look at the potential biblical lens, the actual biblical lens, and the potential implications. Is this something that we should be looking out for? Like, how are we interacting and responding to what is happening in the world? Because that's what being a kingdom thinker is all about. We need to keep looking at the world and what's happening in the world. How's that influencing our worldview, our identity, and how we're responding to it?
Yeah, I was so glad you said that. What's our response?
Yeah.
It's so important, especially when, you read the New Testament and the thing that Jesus spoke about more than not, like when Jesus repeats something, that's for a reason.
Yeah.
And one of the things is deception, right? And it's not to be fearmongers, but it's to say, if he's going to say that deception will be one of those things that is just so prevalent in the world before he comes back, then we should be paying attention to that.
Look for it.
Look for it. And even if something looks half true or has an element of truth in it, there's always real cheese in the rat trap, right? It's like there's always going to be that. That's how do we raise students to see, I can see truth in that, but I can also see how it's been twisted to suit a certain agenda or belief. So that's so important. It's something that it does develop in time, but let's not leave that for the adults. Like, let's actually teach children how to think.
Schools are not having that conversation at all. And I've worked in multiple Christian schools, and there's not even the discussion of, even in the Christian studies class or the chapel, like of the reality of the deception. Do not be conformed. There's not even that. I don't even know what the word is. Not even that consideration to say, okay, these are some things that we need to be thinking about and looking out for and being prepared for. And that's a concern. And if that's not happening in the school, it definitely then needs to be happening in the home.
Absolutely. And I think we'll finish this segment on this, that we want to be raising children that are prepared for the hour that we're living in, not unaware, completely zombieified, I'm going to make up a new word, that enter the world that just go, I guess I'm just following the status quo with what I've been told. I think there's so much to be said about how we're preparing them for the time in history that we are actually living in.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it is time for our last segment of the episode and show, which is Around the Grounds in Christian Education.
Around the grounds, around the grounds, around the grounds in Christian education. Hey!
All right, let's take a quick look around the world at what's happening in Christian and homeschooling education. Well, no surprises, Australia experiencing a homeschooling boom.
Yeah.
Over 45,000 students now homeschooled, many due to bullying and worldview clashes.
Yeah.
Which, no surprises there. The US, obviously experiencing a boom there as well. But a big world schooling movement is happening as well, where you've got families traveling globally for an experiential education. I mean, case in point, you guys.
Yeah, we've spent the past 2, almost 3 years doing exactly that. The whole world, traveling the world. Spent 18 months in Europe, and I would argue it is the best education that we could be giving our children. And there was different times along the way that my wife Jennifer and I were like, they're not doing their English, or they're not doing their maths, whilst we're standing at the front of like a castle. We're like, I think that's okay. That's all right. They can catch up and have a look at that. And, you know, the world, there's so much to learn from the world. Like, yeah, if anyone, I know not everyone could, but if anyone can jump on some sort of experiential learning of world schooling, I think that the benefit of, you know, experiencing culture and money and language and foods and history, like Australia doesn't have the same sort of history that Europe has, right? And we're currently here in Malaysia, like the Asian culture, they're getting Chinese New Year, they're getting ampang from all their uncle and aunties from church, so they're getting these money and experience, you know, Chinese New Year, and it's all you know, new experiences, and to have a real awareness of the world, and then, you know, that informs again worldview and how we see the world and are able to interact with it. I think it's awesome.
So good. And that's how iProject International was born. It was through a family that was traveling that needed assistance with their the children's education. And we basically designed the projects around the places that they were visiting. And we're talking across Europe, the UK, and it was just I thought, this is an education you don't get in school. One, to partner the travel with the learning was really powerful. And obviously not everyone's able to do that, but there's no surprise why that movement isn't something that's growing, and that parents are realizing, actually, let's make that part of how our children learn if we can. And even if that's traveling around their own country, right? Same kind of idea.
Yeah.
So it's so good. Homeschool policy pushback in the US, of all places, land of the free.
Yeah.
Some states, democratic in nature, of course, Illinois proposed oversight laws into the homeschooling sector, which is obviously raising freedom concerns. I've been following this for a little bit, and I know that there's almost always a strong pushback from the homeschooling community. But again, sign of the times we're living in, where because it's growing, government oversight and their role in this sector is something that's becoming more prevalent, even in Australia, with the shift from, even in New South Wales, it going from one body to the New South Wales Department of Education. Yeah. Yeah. It makes, I think, a lot of families nervous that it's shifting hands to be more governmental in its approach.
Yeah.
So, you know, no surprise there. I mean,
in some of our travel, we were in a few countries, and obviously during what would be the typical school term, and people are like, oh, you know, how do you have your kids here? Like, why are your kids with you? Did you, like, oh, just homeschool them? And so countries like, we're in Germany, it's illegal. You're not allowed to homeschool. In Switzerland, it's pretty much illegal also. And unless you have, you know, there's a lot of parameters around, if you want to homeschool, there's certain, rules around it. And we met a family who they just weren't happy with the system. They weren't happy with what it was teaching, and they're not even a Christian family, but just the ideology and the I guess what's being pushed from the front of the classroom did not align with their values, because it was very, you know, global, woke, very much based on the agenda that is trying to be pushed in. We see it across a lot of our schools. And so what they did, all their research, and so they were allowed to they're allowed to homeschool, but you have to hire a qualified educator to homeschool. And no family can afford to hire a full range for just their two kids. So they've started their own homeschool group or community that they go to, like a local hall or room, and they've hired an educator, but they've got other families who have opted into this so that they could build their own curriculum around sort of homeschooling. So I found that really interesting, that firstly, you know, it is illegal in some countries. Like, what families are willing to go through in order to be able to say, hey, we don't align with what this system is sort of teaching our kids. We don't think it's right. So let's get an educator who is aligned and build our own community around that.
Yeah, and I think that's seen in this I guess the term unschooling. I always like to talk to, if parents bring that up, I always say, well, what's your understanding of that? And ask me about what my understanding of it is, because in some ways there's things that we do that would be considered unschooling by some people, especially from that child-led learning point of view, which I think is another really important aspect to how we approach education is, tapping into what they're asking questions about and what they really want to engage in. And so there's no surprise that that's actually happening around the world. And, unschooling, I think to some, it just means different things. So it's always, I think, important to, if it does come up, ask what their definitions are or what you think it is and see if there's some, similar ground there. But unsurprising that is also a trend that we see happening around the world.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of our episode 4. And I think there's been a lot there that we've discussed that, I don't think we planned in the pre-show, but my encouragement to our audience would be to take one intentional step this week, whether it's shifting a conversation, whether it's choosing a new curriculum or, inviting your child deeper into truth from some way. Just do it. Start this week. It's never too late, and it's better to do it now in the time that we're living in, because, we are given as Christians the command to train up a child in the way he should go. So leave that with you, and thank you for joining us for another episode. Make sure you subscribe, share, share with somebody who you think might benefit from this, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Excellent.